Greetings, seniors. Hope you are doing well. I am excited because today we are going to do some preparation for the AP exam. Whew. Just as a reminder, that's May 13th, so coming up, just less than a month. As we always do, let us begin by diving into the calendar first. Make sure we're on the same page there. Giving you a little extension on a project, so that should be helpful, I hope. So here's where we are right now. We did the mini lesson on Monday, and that was really getting you to take all of the good work you've done on your research question for your Shakespeare play, and then you're basically developing that into an analysis piece, right? And I modeled that with Lear, right? Basically, you're trying to enter, quote, the larger conversation. And what I've told you, and what is true, is by doing this, by practicing using that Magic Thesis Statement that I showed you all Monday, you're really getting ready for the AP exam, which is going to be one FRQ, one question. It's not going to be on Shakespeare, it's going to be on a short passage of fiction, but all those same tools are going to be useful to you. So my wrinkle, my extension, is because today I'm going to actually have you try either today or tomorrow. You're going to practice, and then either today or tomorrow take your first FRQ practice on College Board. I'm going to bump back when you need to turn in genre 4, which is your analysis, which is a draft, so don't feel like it's for a grade already yet. But I'm going to bump that back to Sunday, 11:59. Just so you can really focus today and tomorrow on looking at that FRQ practice, and then incorporating some of what you've learned from taking the FRQ into your Shakespeare work. Because like I said, that close reading, it works both ways. So hopefully that will help give you a little more time. And then feel free to check in. I've written in check-in, yesterday, but also you can obviously check in today. If anything on the Shakespeare project isn't making sense, or if you're like, I kind of want to figure out how to apply some of the stuff that you were talking about in your video lesson today to my Shakespeare project. Okay, so we've got a sense of the calendar. Now let's take a look at some new resources. So I'm going to ask you if you want to pause this, you can go to your Schoology. And let me just show you what I'm looking at here. If you go into materials and you slide down to where it says AP exam preparation, this is a folder I created back during our story unit, and it's got a ton of great stuff, but I'm adding some new stuff today. So you should see already, you're probably familiar, all these old prompts from College Board. Remember, we practiced those. We took 2 practice tests in March. You've got Christina and Asher's sample, some really good scores they got. But I'm adding some new stuff, right? One, which I'm going to ask you to read in just a moment, is from the 2017 test, the FRQ2, which you guys are going to be taking in May. And so that's a sample. Then I've also got the LIDS packet, which I think I gave you way back before you even started taking the class as part of your prep for the AP course. But LIDS are super helpful in doing close reading, as we know. I'm going to add to that with some kind of LIDS plus stuff that's especially useful for fiction. I've been taking I'm actually practicing doing the Magic Thesis Statement for fiction and then doing a thesis, so that's all there. So all that's going to be super useful to you. So if you're here in Schoology, skim down to AP exam prep, ton of great stuff right there. So it's all uploaded right now. Now let's look first at LIDS Plus, because I think that's going to be something that everyone will be wanting to use. So we know LIDS is language, imagery, diction, detail, syntax, right? Those are all useful. Please do make use of them as you're studying, preparing for the AP exam. Definitely you could use them. It's open notes for this FRQ. I'm actually on the test itself, but also, for the 40-minute time test you take today or tomorrow. But these are ones that are especially useful to especially fiction, right? So for example, a close reading tool that you'll want to notice is dialogue in fiction is big. Is it direct dialogue? That is, you've got quotes, or maybe it's reported or summarized, what effect does that have on the action of the story? Well, I'll talk about that in the passage I'm looking at. We talked about point of view in our fiction unit, right? You have first, second, or third person. And if it's third, is it limited to just one character, or does the narrator jump into different points of view? If you got a first person narrator, how reliable is that narrator? Remember we talked about Nick Carraway for The Great Gatsby. Does what you're reading make you question the reliability of the narrator or trust them? And then finally, we talked a lot about this when we were creating our own stories. How does the author balance being in a scene, a particular moment, and then jumping back or jumping over time with a summary, right? Does the passage lean more heavily into one or the other? And what's the effect on you as a reader, right? So these 4, and I would call this a growing list. It's a Google Doc, so I might add to it. But these 4 are particular to fiction. So I would keep a close watch on these. It doesn't mean you can't use imagery, diction, detail, syntax. All those are great. But this just adds a few more tools into your tool belt. And I'm going to use a few of them just to model them today in the mini lesson. Okay, so at this moment, before you move on, I would actually pause. You know, you're just 6 or 7 minutes in. I would pause it because what I want you to do next is to prep for my little practice. You just need to do like a 10-minute prep of reading. And I want you to read, right, this one right here, the Smollett text, okay? And I'll pull it up in a second so you can see it, right? So this is from the actual 2017 exam, question 2. And it is a challenging text, right? It's from the 18th century, right? From the Adventures of Peregrine Pickle. So pause this, take your time, read the text. All right, and I paused just to simulate that. I'm not going to read the whole text in front of you. So you've read the text, and now what you're doing is you're thinking, okay, so Mr. Czaia, you showed us these tools, the quote magic thesis statement that we're using with the Shakespeare play. How can I apply that to a work of fiction? All right, so let me show you that. Let me model that. Now, first of all, I think anytime you read a work of fiction, before you dive into trying to respond to the prompt, you want to make sure you understand what's going on. So you've taken the time to read this, and it's probably good for you to summarize in your own mind what it was saying. So what I'm understanding here is we've got these 2 characters, right? It says right there in the prompt, Pickle and Gauntlet. Pickle seems like the sort of protagonist of the novel, and he is in love with Amelia, who really isn't mentioned in the story at all, other than the fact that she is the sister of Godfrey Gauntlet, who's a soldier. And from the beginning, we have this conflict that's unfolding, right? Godfrey, as the protective brother, is skeptical of Pickle's intentions towards his sister. And as the scene starts, right, they're kind of going back and forth. That dialogue quickly leads to conflict. There's a duel between the 2 men. It starts out, maybe it's going to be through pistols, but no, it's with swords. And then in this sword-drawn conflict, we have Peregrine, Pickle, who's not as good with swords. He breaks his own sword in 2, and Godfrey spares him, right? And that's really where the passage ends. So if you pick that up, all right, you understood the passage. If you didn't, all right, you might want to reread. Now, the question is, okay, so I've got a grip on this, right? It took me about 5 or 6 minutes to read it, a couple other minutes just to summarize and make sure I understood it. And that last bit was a little tricky. So if that was kind of like, what's happening there? Understandable. Now I want to think about, okay, can I use the magic thesis statement form to try to come up with a thesis that's gonna really get me into the text and saying something interesting. So remember, that was by looking at blank, we can see blank. This is important because. And here's what I did using some of those new Lids Plus tools, right? I was really interested in pacing and dialogue. So I said, right, by looking at the shift in pacing and reported versus direct dialogue, we can see Smollett, that's the author, depicting a conflict rising between Pickle and Gauntlet very quickly. This is important because it emphasizes the protectiveness of Gauntlet and the defensiveness of Pickle, right? So I'm really trying to show that things ratchet up really quickly because of the way that Smollett gets that direct dialogue, and then the indirect dialogue actually makes it go even faster, right? So, as I went through this, just like I did for Shakespeare, I made sure to put quotes for myself. Now, obviously, do you need to do this on a sheet when you're taking the AP exam? No, you don't, right? But I'm modeling it for you practicing so that, right, you say, okay, I know kind of the idea. So you don't have to do this on the FRQ. I wouldn't expect you to. It's 40 minutes timed. But you want to have this process kind of ingrained in your mind so that you can really roll into close reading into analysis right away. Does that make sense? Okay. So, obviously you can't say if it does or doesn't. You can email me if that doesn't make sense, right? So I've got direct quotes at the beginning. I notice there's a repetition of words like chastise. You said chastise? Gentlemen, and then that really like ratchets up the intensity, right? Then I notice Gauntlet actually gives an out to Pickle. He says, you know what? I'm actually really well known as a sword fighter. You might not want to fight me. Pickle's like, whatever. I've got this, and so he fights him anyways. Doesn't do the pistols. And to me, that really emphasized the quickness of the conflict building, right? So I wrote that here. Direct quotation recreates reaction, counterreaction of argument going out of control. Indirect shows that, we're moving beyond words really quickly to actions, okay? And then, so what? So why is this important? For me, it shows me that these two men, by the way, they're from different social classes, really are not listening to each other, right? They're so wrapped up in defending what they are trying to say, they don't really care about what the other person has to say. I think that's part of the point of what Smollett is trying to show us here. So, I've just been really talking intensely and fast for the last couple minutes, but I want to just take a breath to say, okay, so I did this, right, process, not because if I was taking the test, I would take those kinds of notes. In 40 minutes, you don't have that. Again, it's like you're practicing, right? Think of yourself as like an athlete or a musician. You're kind of running through the scales of what you need to do, right? So we did this with Shakespeare. We did it now with this one. And what I want you to start thinking about is the mentality of, okay, I'm looking at a certain number of things. Those are part of the lids and the lids plus. I notice them. And then I get from the noticing part some insight about what was the purpose of what Smollett was trying to do, right? And then at that point, I'm ready to start putting things together, right? And so I'll show you, and all these, again, are linked up. Then what I, had that sort of messiness, and I took 5 or 6 minutes then to calm myself down and then write a paragraph that would open. And just like I was saying when we were in class together, that opening paragraph, most important thing, right? In your 40 minutes, if you can get a solid opening thesis, right, the chances of the College Board grader, looking at it in positive light are really high. Right? So here's what I did. I said in this passage from Tobias Smollett's novel, we have the portrait of two characters, Peregrine Pickle and Godfrey Gauntlet, determined to have a conflict with one another. Through his use of direct and indirect dialogue, Smollett ratchets up the intensity quickly, making the conflict between the two seem inevitable. Right? So I'm using some of that idea from the by looking at blank, we can see that. The presentation of this inevitable and quickly escalating conflict by Smollett seems deliberate. It perfectly captures how people from two different classes and stations can often talk a lot without ever really hearing each other. Thanks to a quirk in one of the men's swords, this scene has a comic ending, but Smollett's presentation reveals the ending could just as easily have ended tragically. Okay. So the whole point of that was to kind of take you inside of my brain, right? If I'm taking this test, right? And that's really how I would generate a really strong opening paragraph, right? If you feel like, I'm still not sure how to use the Magic Thesis Statement myself, either, with, kind of what I did here or in your own work, let me know. Before I let you go, you need to go to the AP classroom, the College Board, and you need to go to Progress Optional Student Practice. And you are going to take